The biting wind whipped across the barren fields, a lonely sound on a lonely ranch. Dust devils danced where green grass should have been. For years, Elias had poured everything he had into this land, his father's legacy, but the sky hadn't delivered, the well was drying up, and the bank was circling like a hawk. He was close to losing it all. Every creak of the old farmhouse, every sigh of the wind through the skeletal trees echoed his own despair. He often found himself staring out at the endless cracked earth, a knot of dread tightening in his chest. He'd tried everything, prayed for rain, worked himself to the bone, taken out loans he could barely afford. The ranch was his life, his identity, and it was slipping through his fingers like the very soil he fought to keep. He remembered his father's words, spoken with pride. "This land is in our blood, Elias. It's more than just dirt. It's our story." Now, that story felt like it was ending not with a bang, but with a slow, agonizing whimper. He'd even started seeing things, or maybe just hearing things, in the twilight hours. Strange whispers on the wind, fleeting shadows at the edge of his vision. He'd dismissed it as fatigue, the strain of his worries playing tricks on his mind, but today the sounds were different, louder, more distinct, and they were coming from the old barn. He'd been avoiding that barn for months. It was a forgotten place, filled with the ghosts of happier times, of harvests reaped and cattle, fat and healthy. Now it was just a rotting shell, a monument to his failures. But the sound, a soft, unmistakable cry, cut through his weariness and pulled him towards it. It wasn't the mournful howl of the wind or the skittering of unseen critters. This was a sound of pure distress. Hesitantly, he pushed open the creaking, weather-beaten door, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was thick with the scent of old hay, dust, and something else. Something he couldn't quite place. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the warped wooden walls, illuminating dancing motes of dust. It was a familiar sight, yet today it felt unnerving, charged with an unseen energy. He called out, his voice rough with disuse. "Hello! Is anyone there?" Only the echo answered him. He took a step further into the gloom, his boots crunching on the packed dirt floor. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the heavy silence. He scanned the shadows, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. Old farm equipment lay scattered about, draped in cobwebs like forgotten relics. A rusted plough, a broken wagon wheel, bales of hay stacked precariously high. He was about to turn away, to convince himself it was just his imagination, when he heard it again. A faint, whimpering sound coming from the far corner of the barn, behind a towering stack of old hay bales. It was undeniably a cry, soft and desperate. He'd heard animals cry before, of course, but this sounded different, more human. He took a deep, steadying breath, his hand reaching for a sturdy piece of fallen timber lying nearby. He wasn't a man who scared easily, not after years of wrestling with nature and bad luck, but a chill traced its way down his spine. He moved slowly, deliberately towards the sound, his senses on high alert. Each step felt heavier than the last. The air seemed to grow colder as he approached the corner. He could feel a strange energy radiating from behind the hay, a sense of profound sadness that seeped into his very bones. What could possibly be making that sound out here, all alone in the old barn? He strained his ears, trying to pinpoint the exact location of the cries. They were weak, intermittent, as if the source was in great pain or deep fear. He told himself it was probably a stray animal, a lost calf or a fox caught in something. But a nagging feeling persisted, a premonition that this was something far more significant, something that would change everything he thought he knew. He reached the wall of hay bales, their rough texture scratching against his worn denim overalls. He leaned in, pushing aside a few loose strands of hay, and peered into the shadowed space behind them. What he saw next stopped him dead in his tracks. His breath hitched in his throat. His eyes widened, struggling to comprehend the impossible scene before him. He felt a sudden wave of dizziness, as if the ground had tilted beneath his feet. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, but the image remained. It was real, and it was unbelievable. He stood there, frozen, the piece of timber slipping from his numb fingers to clatter silently on the dirt floor. All the worries about the farm, the bank, the endless drought vanished in an instant. They were replaced by a profound shock, a sense of wonder and disbelief so overwhelming it stole his breath. He looked, and he couldn't look away. The ranch, his life, the very fabric of his reality, was about to be irrevocably altered by what lay hidden in the dusty darkness of the old barn. He braced himself, knowing that whatever he was witnessing would challenge everything he believed, everything he understood about the world. He had come to the barn expecting despair, perhaps a lost animal. He was about to find something that would rewrite his entire future, a secret held captive by time and neglect, a secret that was crying out for rescue. He took another breath, the musty air filling his lungs, and prepared himself to witness the unbelievable. The sounds, which had drawn him here, had now led him to a discovery that would shake him to his core. This was not just a discovery, it was a revelation, and he was its sole witness. The weight of it settled upon him. A profound responsibility he hadn't asked for, but could not ignore. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that his life would never be the same from this moment forward. He was no longer just a poor rancher facing ruin. He was the guardian of an extraordinary secret, a secret that had been whispering from the shadows of his own forgotten barn. Elias, a man whose world was shrinking by the day, whose hopes were as parched as the land beneath his feet, stood on the precipice of an event that defied explanation. The ranch, a sprawling testament to generations of hard work and whispered dreams, was on the brink of collapse. Drought had choked the life out of the fields, the riverbeds were dry veins, and the bank's final notices were stacking up like kindling, waiting for a spark to ignite his ruin. Elias himself was a man worn thin by worry. His shoulders were stooped, his hands calloused and cracked, mirroring the very earth he tended. His eyes, once bright with youthful optimism, now held the tired resignation of a man who had fought countless battles and was losing the war. He had inherited this ranch from his father, a man whose spirit was as vast and unyielding as the prairie itself. His father had often spoken of the land not as a commodity, but as a living entity, a partner that demanded respect and unwavering devotion. "The land remembers, Elias," he'd say, his voice a deep rumble. "It gives back what you put into it, good or bad." Elias had tried to honor that sentiment, to pour his own sweat and soul into the soil. But the land, it seemed, had forgotten how to give. The silence of the empty well was a constant mocking reminder of his failures. He'd watched his savings dwindle, his creditors grow impatient, and his sleep become a battlefield of anxious thoughts. The vast, empty sky, which should have offered solace and promise, now seemed like an indifferent, cruel observer of his slow descent. He'd started to imagine things, particularly during those long, solitary evenings when the world outside seemed to hold its breath. Flickers of movement at the periphery of his vision, whispers carried on the wind that sounded eerily like words he couldn't quite grasp. He'd chalked it up to exhaustion, to the relentless pressure that was slowly wearing down his mind. A man pushed to the edge, he reasoned, would start to see and hear things that weren't there. Yet the sound he heard today was undeniably real, and it was growing stronger. It wasn't the desolate howl of the wind, nor the scurrying of rodents in the walls. This was a distinct, plaintive cry, a sound that spoke of vulnerability and deep sorrow. It emanated from the old barn, a structure he had long neglected, a place he now avoided like a tomb. The barn, once a vibrant hub of activity, filled with the comforting sense of livestock and fresh hay, had become a symbol of decay and loss. Its timbers were rotting, its roof sagged, and its doors, once thrown open with pride, now clung precariously to their hinges, groaning under the weight of neglect. But the cry, persistent and heart-wrenching, had pierced through his carefully constructed wall of denial and despair. It was a sound that demanded attention, a call for help that Elias, despite his own troubles, couldn't ignore. With a sigh that felt heavy with the weight of his own misfortunes, Elias turned his gaze towards the barn. It stood silhouetted against the bruised twilight sky, a dark, foreboding shape against the fading light. The wind seemed to whisper through its broken panes, a mournful dirge that did little to soothe Elias's growing unease. He walked towards it, his boots kicking up clouds of dry, brittle dust. The journey from the farmhouse to the barn, usually a familiar stroll, felt like crossing a vast, uncharted territory, each step heavy with apprehension. The closer he got, the clearer the sound became. It wasn't the wail of a wild animal or the groan of settling timbers. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated sadness, a cry that tugged at something deep within him, something he thought had long since been buried under layers of disappointment. He reached the barn door, its wood warped and splintered by years of exposure. The hinges screamed a protest as he forced it open, the sound echoing unnervingly in the stillness. The air inside was a stagnant mixture of dry hay, animal dander, and something else, something subtle yet unsettling, a scent that hinted at secrets long kept. Dust motes, illuminated by slivers of light piercing the gloom, danced in the stagnant air, creating an ethereal, almost spectral atmosphere. The familiar chaos of abandoned farm equipment, a rusted-out plough, a broken harness, forgotten tools, lay scattered like forgotten memories, each item a silent witness to Elias's failing legacy. He called out, his voice a rasp, "Anyone there?" Only the hollow echo of his own question bounced back at him, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the barn. His heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a primal drumbeat of fear and anticipation. He took a tentative step inside, his boots crunching on the packed earth floor. His eyes, accustomed to the harsh glare of the sun, struggled to adjust to the cavernous shadows. He scanned the dim interior, his gaze sweeping over the forgotten corners, the stacked bales of hay, the cobweb-draped rafters. He was about to dismiss the cries as an auditory hallucination, a final cruel trick of his weary mind, when the sound came again, stronger this time, more distinct. It was a soft, almost desperate whimpering, originating from the far end of the barn, partially obscured by a towering mound of old hay bales. It was a sound that resonated with pain, a sound that Elias recognized with a jolt. It was a cry, unmistakably, but one that held a vulnerability far beyond that of any farm animal he had ever encountered. He reached for a fallen piece of timber, its weight a meager comfort in his hand. Years of hardship had etched a resilience into Elias, but this unnerving symphony of despair and mystery was beginning to fray his nerves. He moved forward, his steps measured and deliberate, his senses hyper-alert. The air grew perceptibly colder as he approached the hay bales, a chilling sensation that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. He felt an almost tangible aura of sadness emanating from behind the barrier of hay, a profound sorrow that seemed to seep into the very marrow of his bones. He pushed aside a few loose strands of hay, his rough fingers brushing against their dry, brittle texture. He leaned in, his eyes straining to penetrate the thick shadows. And then he saw it. What lay before him stole his breath, froze his blood, and silenced the frantic beating of his heart. His mind reeled, struggling to reconcile the impossible sight with the reality he knew. He blinked, convinced it was a phantom conjured by his stress, but the image remained, stark and undeniable. Elias stood frozen, the piece of wood falling from his nerveless fingers, landing with a soft thud on the dirt. The farm, the bank, the drought, all the crushing weight of his worries seemed to evaporate, replaced by an overwhelming wave of shock and awe. He was staring at something that defied logic, something that shattered his understanding of the world. He looked, and in that moment, the future of his ranch, his life, and his very perception of reality was irrevocably altered. He had come to the barn, seeking an answer to the crying, perhaps a lost calf or a trapped fox. He was about to discover a truth hidden for years, a secret that had been crying out for liberation. He took a ragged breath, the dusty air filling his lungs, and braced himself for the impossible. The cries had led him here, to a revelation that would redefine his existence. This was not just a discovery, it was a moment that would etch itself into the annals of his life. A turning point he had never anticipated. He, Elias, the struggling rancher on the verge of ruin, was now the sole witness to a miracle, or perhaps a tragedy, hidden in the forgotten corner of his own decaying barn. The weight of this unspoken secret settled upon him, a profound and unexpected burden. He knew, with a certainty that bypassed rational thought, that his life was about to take a turn no one could have foreseen. The lonely rancher was no longer just facing foreclosure. He was standing at the threshold of an astonishing enigma, a secret that had been patiently waiting in the quiet darkness for him to find it. He was about to embark on a journey far more profound than any he had ever imagined, a journey born from the sound of crying in an old, forgotten barn. This was the beginning of everything. The moment the ordinary was shattered, and the extraordinary began to unfold, all thanks to a sound that refused to be silenced. His future, once a bleak and predictable landscape, had suddenly become a vast, unexplored territory, filled with both wonder and trepidation, all because of what he was about to witness. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the land. But for Elias, a different kind of light was about to dawn, one that would illuminate the deepest, most hidden corners of his world. The barn held its breath, a silent sentinel waiting for Elias to fully comprehend the magnitude of what lay within its weathered walls. It was a moment suspended in time, pregnant with possibility and fraught with the unknown. The farmer, stripped of his usual worries by the sheer impossibility of the scene, could only stare, his mind grappling with the overwhelming evidence before his eyes. This was not a dream. It was a stark, unbelievable reality, and it was calling to him, demanding his attention, his understanding, and perhaps his protection. The air, thick with dust and the scent of decay, now also seemed to hum with an unseen energy, the energy of a profound and life-altering discovery. Behind the hay, Elias found not an animal, but a tiny newborn foal, its legs still wobbly, its eyes wide with fear. It was impossibly small and clearly abandoned. The shock that had gripped Elias began to recede, replaced by a surge of protectiveness. There, nestled amongst the dusty straw and shadows, was a creature of pure vulnerability. It was a foal, impossibly small, its coat the color of pale moonlight, its legs still too weak to fully support its tiny frame. Its eyes, large and dark, blinked slowly, reflecting the meager light filtering through the barn's cracked walls. It let out another soft whimper, a sound that twisted Elias's gut with a mixture of pity and bewilderment. How could this fragile life have ended up here, alone and exposed? He knelt slowly, his knees protesting on the hard-packed earth, careful not to startle the foal. He reached out a trembling hand, his rough, weathered fingers hovering inches from its delicate head. The foal flinched slightly, then seemed to sense the lack of threat. It nudged its nose tentatively into his palm, a gesture of trust that resonated deeply within Elias. This small act of acceptance from a creature so seemingly helpless chipped away at the hardened shell of despair he had carried for so long. He saw not just an abandoned animal, but a symbol of hope, a flicker of life in the overwhelming darkness of his own situation. His ranch was failing, his future uncertain, but here, in this forgotten corner, was a life that depended entirely on him. He couldn't just walk away. He looked at the foal, its ribs faintly visible beneath its thin skin, and a fierce determination ignited within him. He would not let this creature perish. He scooped it up gently, cradling its surprisingly light weight against his chest. The foal nestled into him, its small breaths warm against his worn shirt. He felt a profound sense of connection, a shared desperation, and a shared will to survive. He stood slowly, carrying his precious, unexpected burden. The journey back to the farmhouse felt different this time. The wind no longer sounded like a mournful dirge, but a gentle whisper of encouragement. The dust devils seemed to dance with a new, hopeful energy. He entered his humble home. The silence that had once amplified his loneliness now felt expectant, ready to embrace this new arrival. He found an old, soft blanket and fashioned a makeshift bed in a warm corner of the kitchen, away from drafts and the curious gaze of the outside world. He carefully placed the foal down, and it immediately curled into a tight ball, exhaustion evident in its every movement. Elias watched over it, a silent guardian. He knew he had no experience with newborn foals, no specialized knowledge, but he had instinct and a growing sense of purpose. He fetched warm water and a clean cloth, gently wiping away the dust and debris clinging to the foal's coat. He found a discarded milk bottle from his own childhood, cleaned it thoroughly, and began the arduous task of trying to feed it. The first attempts were clumsy, frustrating. The foal was weak, hesitant, but Elias persisted, his movements slow and patient. He whispered words of comfort, his voice rough but steady, imbuing each word with the hope he was slowly rediscovering within himself. He was no longer just a rancher fighting a losing battle. He was a caregiver, a protector. This tiny life had given him a reason to keep fighting, a reason to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, things could get better. He spent hours by the foal's side, ensuring it was warm, fed, and safe. Sleep was a distant luxury. His mind, once consumed by debts and despair, was now focused on the intricate needs of this fragile being. He researched foal care online, his fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar keyboard, absorbing information about nutrition, temperature, and common ailments. Every little victory, a successful feeding, a stronger wobble of its legs, a brighter gleam in its eye, felt like a monumental triumph, a sign that he and this little creature were a team, facing the world together. The days that followed blurred into a routine of care and quiet hope. Elias began to notice subtle changes not only in the foal, but in himself. The crushing weight on his shoulders began to lighten. He found himself looking forward to the dawn, eager to check on his charge. He started making small repairs around the barn, his movements more purposeful, his mind clearer. The act of tending to the foal seemed to mend something within him too. He realized that his father's words about the land remembering were true, but perhaps it wasn't just the land. Perhaps life, in its most vulnerable forms, also remembered kindness, remembered care. He began to see the ranch not just as a source of financial ruin, but as a place of potential, a sanctuary. He started to imagine the foal growing strong, running free in the fields. If only he could bring the fields back to life. This renewed sense of purpose fueled his efforts. He contacted old friends, fellow ranchers who had managed to weather the drought better than he had. He swallowed his pride and asked for advice, for support, for any little bit of help they could offer. To his surprise, many responded with genuine warmth and a willingness to share their knowledge and resources. They saw the change in Elias, the renewed spark in his eyes, and they rallied around him. Some offered to share water, others provided feed, and a few even came by to help with repairs, their presence a welcome distraction from his solitary struggle. The story of the abandoned foal spread through the small community, a beacon of hope in a time of widespread hardship. It reminded people that even in the bleakest of circumstances, life could find a way, and that compassion could bloom in the most unexpected places. Elias found himself talking about the foal, his voice filled with a pride he hadn't felt in years. He named her Hope. As Hope grew stronger, her playful spirit began to fill the quiet farmhouse. Her tiny, clumsy trots around the kitchen, her curious nips at Elias's overalls, her contented sighs as she slept by the hearth. Each moment was a precious gift. She was a constant reminder of what he was fighting for. The challenges were still immense. The drought hadn't broken, the bank still loomed, but Elias no longer felt alone. He had hope, and he had a community that had been reminded of the power of shared purpose and simple kindness. He began to plan for the future with a clarity he hadn't possessed before. He started researching drought-resistant crops, exploring new ways to manage water resources, and looking into grants available for struggling ranchers. The idea of rebuilding, once an impossible dream, now felt like a tangible goal. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, and days when the old despair threatened to resurface. But he also knew that he had found something invaluable in that old barn, a reason to keep going, a testament to resilience, and a profound understanding that even the smallest spark of life could ignite the greatest change. The sight of Hope, now a healthy, spirited young horse, galloping across a small, carefully irrigated pasture he had managed to restore, was a more powerful reward than any financial gain. Her joyous energy was infectious, a tangible representation of the hope that had returned to his life and to his ranch. He had faced ruin and found not an ending, but a new beginning, all because he dared to follow the sound of a cry from the old barn. He had learned that sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't about finding what you've lost, but about finding what you never knew you were missing. He looked out at his ranch, the land still scarred but showing signs of healing, and a sense of peace settled over him. It wasn't just about saving the ranch anymore. It was about nurturing life, about fostering resilience, and about believing in the possibility of renewal. The story of Elias and Hope became a legend in the region, a testament to the enduring power of compassion and the unexpected miracles that can emerge from the depths of despair. It served as a powerful reminder to everyone that no matter how bleak things may seem, a single act of kindness, a willingness to listen to a cry for help, could change everything. And for Elias, the sound of his horse's hooves on the revitalized land was the sweetest music he had ever heard, a melody of gratitude, resilience, and the enduring promise of hope. If you were moved by Elias's story and the incredible journey of hope, please share this video with your friends and family. Let's spread this inspiring message of resilience and compassion far and wide. If you believe in the power of second chances and the impact of a helping hand, hit that like button. Your engagement helps us bring more stories like this to you. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next incredible tale of hope and perseverance. What would you have done if you heard crying from an old barn? Let us know in the comments below. Your thoughts and experiences are what make our community so special. Thank you for watching, and remember, even in the toughest times, there's always hope to be found.